Welcome back to the studio, folks, and thanks for listening. I was recently at the RAF Hornchurch Heritage Centre in Essex, which is located in two former RAF buildings from the former Hornchurch sector station. Excellent place to visit. Have a look at them online. It's really, really good. They've got some great stuff in there, and there are some really, really good museums dotted around the country that have got some great Battle of Britain artefacts in them. And a lot of these museums are volunteer staffed and driven, and they deserve our support. So hot off the press, RAF Hornchurch Heritage Centre, not to be missed. Now, while I was there, I was reminded of an old friend of mine, Squadron leader Jack Stokoe, DFC, who during the Battle of Britain was a sergeant pilot flying with 603 Squadron from Hornchurch. And I recorded Jack's memoirs, and he was a bit of a character, was Jack. Born on the 1st of February 1920, the son of a miner in West Cornforth near Durham. And after leaving school, he travelled south in search of work and indeed a better life than a depressed northeast England was likely to offer at the time. And he found an administrative position with Buckinghamshire County Council at Aylesbury. But in June 1939, he joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. And he wrote to me about this on the 7th of July 1995, and I included a chapter on Jack in my book Letters from the Few, which is based on, each chapter's about a different pilot, and it's based on their letters to me. And this is what he says about the Volunteer Reserve. He said, "Only a year before the Battle of Britain began, my contemporaries and I were pursuing our civilian careers whilst learning to fly with the RAFVR in our spare time. The majority of us were 18 or 19 years old and given the rank of sergeant on call-up, which at first caused much dismay amongst the ranks of professional sergeants, many of whom had taken 20 years to reach that exalted rank. Most of us had only 50 or 60 hours flying on elementary types like Tiger Moths and Magisters when we were called up. After a brief spell at initial training wing to instill some discipline into us, we had about 100 hours on Harvard's at flying training school, which included a few trips actually firing guns. We were then posted to an operational training unit, in my case Aston Down, before being posted to an operational fighter squadron with just 10 to 15 hours on combat aircraft. Imagine that, 10 to 15 flying hours on combat aircraft. And I remember my old Polish friend Kajek Budzik saying it was one thing being able to fly a Spitfire, but it was quite another being able to fight in one. Anyway, afterwards Jack was first posted to 263 Squadron flying Hurricanes, but then the unit converted to the twin-engine Westland Whirlwind, the Crikey, and Sergeant Stokoe elected to remain on single-engine fighters. And he continues. He says, "I eventually joined 603 City of Edinburgh Squadron, an auxiliary Air Force squadron, and there were only 3 sergeant pilots, the remainder already being pilot officers. By 27th of August 1940, the squadron had moved south to Hornchurch, by which time I had about 70 hours on Spits and had sighted, but not engaged, 2 Heinkel reconnaissance aircraft in the north of Scotland. On 29th of August, we flew 4 patrols, intercepting Me-109s on 2 of them. I claimed 1 damaged, but the trimming wires of my own aircraft were shot away. On 30th of August, we made 4 more interceptions, during the course of which I was credited with 1 Me-109 confirmed and 1 damaged. My own aircraft was damaged by a cannon shell in the windscreen and my hand slightly cut by splinters. On 1st of September came 3 more interceptions of 20 plus bandits, one of which I shot down in flames in the Canterbury area. On 2nd of September I was involved in 2 interceptions, during the course of which I damaged 2 enemy aircraft, but was myself shot down in flames and bailed out. On that occasion, as I was attacking an enemy aircraft, I remember machine gun bullets, or maybe cannon shells, hitting my Spitfire, followed by flames in the cockpit as the petrol tanks exploded. I thought, Christ, I've got to get out of here and quick. I undid the straps and opened the hood, but this turned the flames into a blowtorch. I was not wearing gloves, as during a hasty scramble I had forgotten them, but had to put my hands back into the fire to invert the Spitfire so that I could drop out. No ejector seats in those days. I remember seeing sheets of skin peeling off the backs of my hands before I fell out of the plane. I was then concerned regarding whether the parachute would function or whether it had been damaged by fire. But I pulled the ripcord and the chute opened. I landed in a field, but the Home Guard queried whether I was an enemy agent. A few choice words in English soon convinced him that I was genuine, and thereafter I was rushed into the emergency hospital at Leeds Castle, suffering from shock and severe burns to my hands, neck and face. I was in hospital for 6 weeks before returning to operational duties on 22nd of October 1940, with further combat success. A second tour of duty with 54 Squadron followed, which included a second bailing out into the North Sea, before secondment to a training unit and night fighter duties later in the war. The point about the incident when I was shot down over Kent on September the 2nd, 1940, is that at the time 603 Squadron was suffering such heavy casualties that things got pretty chaotic. So for 4 days after bailing out, I was reported missing in action. The Squadron records show that in the 30 days after arriving at Hornchurch, the casualties were 9 dead, 9 wounded, 1 missing and 1 prisoner of war. Not bad for a lot of amateurs, which we of the RAF and those of the Auxiliary Air Force were. I hope this diatribe gives you the information you wanted, and if you run short of subjects for future publications, the exploits of the RAF, those enthusiastic amateurs, might have some interesting highlights. Well, how right Jack was, and let's not forget that the top scoring RAF fighter pilot in the Second World War, Johnny Johnson, had actually been turned down by the Auxiliary Air Force because he wasn't of the right social class, and joined the volunteer reserve. So actually the top scorer was a reservist. On the 22nd of July 1995, Jack wrote to me again. One other incident of which I was only aware after the war was that on 31st of August 1940, 603 Squadron intercepted a raid over Woolwich, during which I shot down an ME-109E, apparently flown by a Lieutenant Binder of 1 Grupper JG3, which, as it plummeted to the ground, collided with a 603 Squadron Spitfire flown by Flying Officer Bubbles Waterston, who was killed. The Spitfire fell on Woolwich and burnt out, the bulk of the 109 crashing into gardens at Plumstead. Another point which may be of some interest relates to Pilot Officer Richard Hillary. Now, Richard Hillary, of course, was the author of the classic memoir The Last Enemy, and we have a pod on the channel about Battle of Britain memoirs that delves into The Last Enemy, so that might be another listen of interest to you. But moving on, he says, yes, Pilot Officer Richard Hillary, who was eventually killed in an accident whilst undergoing night fighter training at East Fortune on the 8th of January 1943. I was at that time an instructor there on Blenheims and Beaufighter Mark IIs and was on duty on the 8th of January 1943, but only during the day and not in the ensuing night flying when he was killed. You ask about Flight Lieutenant Rusty Rushmer, but I have no real knowledge and I don't believe I actually met him. Before the Battle of Britain, I joined 603 Squadron's A Flight at Dice near Aberdeen, and Rushmer commanded B Flight at Montrose. When we moved to Hornchurch, the flights remained rather separate, often at different states of readiness, and on the few occasions we operated as a squadron, there was little time for formal introductions. When Rushmer was killed on the 5th of September, I was myself in hospital suffering from burns. Hope this is of some help. Well, Jack then sent me some photographs. In his words, +1 of me being fished out of the North Sea at the end of a rope from a minesweeper. There's a lot of sea and not much of me. Date 20th of April 1941, when I was with 54 Squadron. The picture was taken by one of the crew which pulled me out. And then he wrote to me again about that day. I have some difficulty remembering the sequence of events just before and after being shot down. Not entirely surprising, as when I was admitted to hospital I was suffering from shock, concussion, exhaustion and hypothermia, aided and abetted by a generous helping of Navy rum, for which at the time I was extremely grateful. As far as I remember, we were patrolling about 10 to 20 miles out in the North Sea off Clacton, probably vectored there by control reporting bandits in the area. Then suddenly we were in a combat situation and I was firing at an enemy aircraft, then a blank. I was still in the air but minus an aircraft which had disappeared entirely, probably as a result of one or more direct hits from cannon shells behind the armour-plated seat. I had not opened the hood or disconnected my oxygen supply or intercom or unstrapped the seat harness, and I seemed not to be surprised or unduly worried that I was apparently flying without any visible means of support. Nor did I seem to have any sensation of falling. My helmet was missing, as were my gloves and one of my flying boots, and when I got around to looking, my parachute looked somewhat the worse for wear. However, I pulled the ripcord, the chute opened, and I landed in a very cold and somewhat wild sea. My hands did not seem to be functioning properly, and I was unable to free myself from the parachute, which remained attached to me and shows quite clearly in the photograph. I slowly recollected that I ought to have an inflatable dinghy, and after another struggle managed to inflate it, only to have it burst. Whether it was damaged, whether I inflated it too quickly, we will never know, but I certainly reached a new low in the survival stakes. However, I managed to hang on grimly to a certain amount of air in an undamaged corner of the deflated dinghy and struggled feebly to stay afloat. When I had just about given up hope, I heard voices. A ship was near me and ropes were thrown. I grabbed one and was hauled aboard. I remember little else, but was told the rest of the story by a couple of the crew members, possibly the captain and his mate, when they visited me in Harwich Hospital and presented me with the photograph you now have. Apparently, they wrapped me in blankets, gave me an unspecified hot drink and laid me to rest in a bunk. An RAF Air Sea rescue launch then arrived and wanted to take me back, but fortunately the skipper said I was comfortably resting aboard and he was returning to port anyway, so I remained where I was. I say fortunately because I was told that the launch overturned in rough sea outside the harbour and I was in no fit state to face another struggle. They also reported seeing an enemy aircraft crash into the sea before fishing me out. I was in hospital for 7 days and had 7 days leave, but strangely enough I have no recollection of whether I went home or not, although it is likely that I did. I returned to duty with 54 Squadron and was back in action again on the 6th of May 1941. So there we are. What incredible adventures that Jack has survived, and we go on here. On that day that Jack went back to 54 Squadron, the squadron had taken off from Hornchurch at 16:25 to patrol Barrow Deep, and on arrival a staffel of ME-109s was sighted above, one of which attacked the Spitfires head on, passing above them before turning to attack A flight from astern. The squadron broke in all directions, after which Pilot Officer Colebrook was last seen heading seawards, streaming glycol. Oberleutnant Winfried Balfans of Stab JG-51 claimed a Spitfire destroyed, most likely being Colebrook. The Royal Navy claimed the destruction of two ME-109s, but there were no such casualties in fact. Given how Jack's aircraft dramatically disintegrated around him, it's likely that he was actually hit by anti-aircraft fire, not by a 109, and was therefore a victim of so-called friendly fire. When I put this to Jack, his response was understandable. Friendly fire wasn't very bloody friendly, you take it from me. Legend. So, during his time flying Spitfires in 1940 and 41, Jack Stokoe destroyed 7 enemy aircraft. He was commissioned on the 26th of June 1941, and after spells instructing, his DFC was gazetted on D-Day, 6th of June 1944. And in 1946, Jack was demobbed, going to work for Rochester County Council as a Weights and Measures Inspector. But he was keen to fly again, and in 1947 rejoined the RAF VR, instructing in his spare time on tiger moths and chipmunks until 1952. And in 1998, Jack joined me for a book signing at that year's Biggin Hill Air Show, at which we were joined by German Battle of Britain ace Ulrich Steinhilper and William Walker, 616 Squadron, shot down, bailed out over the Goodwin Sands, 26th of August 1940. Check it out. There's a pod and a video, I think, about William, certainly one or the other, on the channel. So, yeah, Jack, they were great letters to receive. They were with all that detail, and to have that written in his hand and in all of their hands, which was the thing. It's much better than an email, isn't it, to have a letter written in somebody's hand if it's somebody from the pages of history. But Jack died on the 1st of October 1979, aged 79, and was a lucky man to survive being shot down twice, particularly that time being shot down into the North Sea. So there we have it, the Battle of Britain memories of Sergeant Jack Stokoe, later squadron leader Jack Stokoe, DFC, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to it. I think this YouTube channel is a great way, a modern way of sharing these stories, making a record of them, which is just so crucially important. We can't forget what these men went through as very young men. As Jack says, those people training in the VR were mostly 18 or 19 years old, and were either that age or not much older when they actually went into action. 5 miles above the earth. Can you imagine that? How amazing. So there we have it. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you like what we do, please subscribe to the channel. It's free. We've got over 50 videos and pods and shorts available on the channel now for your interest. Any ideas for future content, I'm all ears. Join the community, join the discussion. Any feedback, good or bad, below. Keep it civil. And I'll look forward to talking to you again in the not too distant future. Thanks for listening.